tell us a bit about your deep end?
The deep end for me is the idea of care. So care is the capacity and activity of a society that involves everything necessary for the flourishing of life. We don't need this for the flourishing of life. The Anthropocene and the way we understand nature, the detrimental effects it's had on other creatures that we share the planet with, brought me to the space where I make the work that I do. For ACCA in 2002, I made a work called The Young Family. Juliana Emberg was the curator of my show. She was the director of ACCA, and she gave me the opportunity to have this big exhibition, the whole space.
I think my deep end has been sort of rubbing up against particularly spaces of institutional power and control. I grew up in a quite religious household, staunchly Catholic household, and my dad was actually a Catholic priest. And so the church as an institution, I guess, loomed large in my early years. Yeah. It feels very strange, yeah. It feels very surreal. The Catholic Church is something I struggled with as I was wrestling with my identity quite a lot. I mean, I knew I was queer in my early teens, like pretty young, but I was still in the closet. And I stopped going to church when I was about 15, which was kind of a big deal in my family. Me leaving the church at that age was part of a broader teenage rebellion that I was having. But then as I got older, I'd sort of gone back to the history and the art and the traditions of Catholicism in particular, and I draw on that iconography and history in my work a lot. So my 15-year survey exhibition at ACCA was entitled Word Made Flesh, which is a phrase that's borrowed from the Gospel of John. The exhibition was co-curated with Max Delaney and also my partner, Devon Ackerman. Because it was such a large body of works, it was impossible to do it in a sort of chronological way, so we came up with these thematic rubrics that could hold different bodies of works that were made at different times in different forms.
My deep end is needing to see the horizon line. I'm a Guggulthura Nukunu woman from South Australia. I grew up in the desert and spent a lot of my childhood in the middle of nowhere, because part of my practice is a lot about returning home to South Australia and particularly my birthplace in Woomera. I find living in a city or the concrete jungle as such is quite claustrophobic. Yeah, there's not a lot of trees here, are there? I guess I feel restless, I think. Like it is, like we can hear the traffic at the moment and it's kind of like we're in probably what is the quietest place. And I was just saying to someone recently, I feel like I need to go out bush again. The work I created, is not always about a happy place, and it is directly about the colonisation of Australia and how it's affected Indigenous people here. I always feel like artworks, or art in general, is a really important way to educate people who wouldn't necessarily think about how Australia was colonised. I had a survey show at ACCA in 2021 and it was called Missile Park, and it had a series of works that were created over a 15-year period. So it began with family stories, eugenics, scientific testing, genocide, and then nuclear colonisation.
my deep end is erasure, and by that I mean things that are erased, holes, things that are hidden, covered, kind of the abyss, the ruin. Well, erasure. There's a lot talked about with my work in terms of its relationship to architecture, but in fact, it's never really been about the subject of architecture. It's always been about the kind of erased object, the thing that's kind of missing, the hidden, the whole. So I do think about wanting to confuse an audience enough where they start thinking about the world, even for just a tiny moment, in an entirely different way. Babylonia was a large-scale model of the island of Lisca Bianca. It was just sort of one object, and so if you put one object in the space, it's going to kind of have a conversation with the space and with the architecture. So I like that idea of the room in conversation with the object, how much space is around it. You know, you plot, how much an audience can sort of swing this way or that, and so on.
I think art can be a place where we can discuss these things in an open-ended way, where it can be an embodied discussion. A cerebral one, intellectual, conceptual, of course, but also one with feeling. And I think that's the strength of art, and that's why I make art.
If you have a show at ACCA, that's it, it's a huge achievement.
ACCA was kind of the mark that point where I made a major shift.
Opened up opportunities for me to show internationally.
The Venice Biennale.
Gropius Bau in Berlin.
I did a work called Valhalla, which is a work I did for Venice, which actually really came out of Babylonia at ACCA. I've seen it go from a little house near the Botanical Gardens to a larger scale museum. So I've seen it kind of burgeon into a sort of significant, contemporary art space. I mean, the great thing about ACCA is it's a space that you can control the environment. I think Wood Marsh understood that it's not really a white cube, it's actually a black box.
You don't know if it's a single-storey building, a series of shipping containers, or a 4-storey building, until you get a figure, like in a De Chirico painting, against the object, and then you can start seeing the scale.
It's just retained its rigour and its kind of reach.
Through the course of making that exhibition at ACCA, my relationship to that institution's changed in many profound ways.
I see ACCA's role as one that they've done very well since the beginning, and that is championing Australian art.
You can take a risk, you can go to a place that maybe you're not protected to go to elsewhere.
It does really give artists the opportunity to think more broadly about their practice.
It was one of the first times that I was really taken seriously, like, oh, this is like a big show and it's with my people.
It has its own identity, which is really good.
What would it be like if ACCA didn't exist in the kind of ecology that we have here? And it would be a real whole, a real kind of erasure, actually.
So much of our culture now is digitised, and I think going to a physical site and having a bodily relationship with artworks and ideas, I think is a part of a really important aspect of our cultural health and well-being that shouldn't be underestimated, actually, yeah.
Happy birthday, ACCA.
Happy 40th, ACCA.
Happy birthday, ACCA.
Thanks for the happy memories.
You're incredibly important to our culture.
I can't wait for the next 40 years.
And here's to the next 40 years.
Good on ya.
Happy birthday, and may you long reign.